You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you so much, band. Appreciate you guys being here. When I was in college, I was in a core class I had to take on. It was a biology class. And the professor, I don't know, to give you kind of a mental picture, if you've ever seen Cheers, he looked like Fraser Crane from Cheers, but with less of a fashion sense and a little bit more bug-eyed. Anyway, but my biology professor, I knew he was actually also a Christian, just by a couple other conversations I had with him. And so I'm taking his class, and I started hearing some of the things he was describing in the class, and it just really started to unsettle me and give me a lot of questions of faith and a crisis of faith. He would talk about Darwin's tree of life, or he would talk about, the Miller experiment, where a scientist took a bunch of gases and shot in electricity and created amino acids, or he'd talk about the missing link and stuff like that. And as he talked about these things, it started to give me a crisis of faith. And afterwards, after class one day, I went up to him and I'm like, I'm confused on why you don't talk about God or creation or how this all fits in with your view of creation or anything like that. And he goes, well, I can't. And I go, what do you mean by that? And he's like, I can't talk about my faith when I'm talking about science. They're two different things. And he went on, I was, kind of taken aback by that, but he went on to explain that science deals with the measure of things. Science deals with what can be verified, what can be tested, what can be falsified, what can be proven. You take a hypothesis and you have an experiment and you test it again and again, and that's what science is. And the problem with God is you can't measure God, you can't prove it, you can't test it or study it, and so we're kind of science can't even begin to ask the question about faith, because it's like, asking, science might as well discuss ballet or basketball. It doesn't even deal with the realm of what science is talking about. They're limited. You're not going to get a grant to do scientific research to prove a creator, because that falls outside of the bounds of science. You're not going to see alternative theories of creationism in a science textbook, because, again, it falls out of science. After the last service, the 8 o'clock service, we have the lead professor of anatomy at Kellogg's Community College was here. They worship here at St. Mark, and they said, I resonated with everything you say about the tension you feel in the science community as a person of faith. It really is difficult to put these things together. And she said, even when I mentioned creation or a creator or the creative process, you can see the eyebrows in the room raised, because it doesn't fit in a science classroom. And what I wanted to do in this series, or today, is as we continue our series, The Reason for God, and we ask the question of, hasn't science disproved Christianity, as kind of bridge that gap between science and faith. Because what happens is, because science will raise these objections about faith, then it's like science dominates the conversation and faith doesn't get an opportunity to respond. And maybe you read something in National Geographic or saw something on a website or something like that, and you have all these questions, and where do you go for those kind of answers? And so today, I'd like to give opportunity for faith to kind of answer some of the questions that science has raised about creation, and then also ask a few questions of science along the way. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, all of this really deals, we got to move at light speed today, though, so just brace yourself. But all of this deals with really one small section of our Bible, a section called Genesis, and really just chapters 1, maybe 2 and 3, but really the beginning of chapter 1 is where everything that science is talking about and trying to understand is described in Genesis 1. And this is the source of conflict that has spilled a lot of ink and a lot of blood over the years. And Before we even get into Genesis, one piece of context, there's a lot of context I could give, but one piece of context I want to give is that we forget that this was written by a man named Moses. After the Israelites are miraculously freed from the hand of Egypt, they're wandering in the deserts. Moses writes down the oral history of Egypt, but then he also he writes down like the revelation God gave him of the commandments that God's laws and everything like that, and so as the people of Israel are wandering in the desert, they're trying to figure out who is this God that we're following. What's his name, and what is the things that he cares about? That was the pressing question on their mind. So they had just been miraculously freed from Egypt, and for hundreds of years in Egypt, they listened to stories of the Egyptian gods, and the Egyptian gods were in conflict with one another, and the strongest one would prevail, and they created, and like most creation stories, order out of chaos. That's how most creation stories go in most, like religious texts. And Moses is like, no, guys, actually, our God creates order immediately. And then there was this descent into chaos, but it starts with order. And our God is so authoritative, he doesn't go back and forth trying to fight with other gods, and there's not this combat. Our God is just so authoritative, he speaks and it exists. Our God is the creator before all things. He is God outside of time, space, and matter. He is above and beyond those things, just like if you and I were looking at an apple on a table. He's able to look at existence outside of it. By nature of being God, he has no beginning, he has no end. He is the uncreated one, God. And so the question that Genesis is answering is not how the world was made. The question Genesis 1 is answering is who made the world? That's the question in their minds. It's not these Egyptian gods, guys. It's our God, and here's what he did. And it's concerned with a sequence of events, but we can't read it like a science textbook trying to give us the how. The question it's answering is the who. And I think that helps temper our expectations. We're looking for something. It prevents us from looking for something that's actually not in there. It's a question of who, not how. And that changes how we read the text. So here's the text, and notice how it begins. Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God. So there it is. In the beginning, God. And now let me ask you a question. Notice that God is outside of these things. It's like, in the beginning, God. How long was the beginning? First question we get right away. I don't know. And as we read this, is Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2 setting up a description of the days that follow? Or is it a sequence before the first day? And when you read Genesis, you kind of look at it and you go, I don't know. So how long is the beginning? I don't know. But we know God. Okay. And then, watch this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? There's no word for universe or galaxy in Hebrew. It's just the heavens and the earth. Now, there's some problems with this, and I'll get to them in just a moment. But just hold in your mind that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Is this a description of the sequence of events, or is this a foreshadowing of the days that are going to follow? Don't know. Because what follows is day one. Check this out. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Before we ever get to the first day. Why is this a problem? Well, because take a look at all of the things that are already there. Heavens, earth. Go next slide, please. Heavens, earth, it's formless, and waters. You know what hasn't been created yet? The stars, waters, light, rocks, or land. Those are in the subsequent days of creation to follow, as you'll see in just a moment. But already it's using terms to describe something that hasn't been created yet. Is this a foreshadowing or a sequence of events? We don't know. But then we get to day one. Okay, day one. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good. And he separated the light from darkness. And then God called the light day. And that's this Hebrew word yom. Day. And it shares a root word with the word heat. So it's this idea of like the sun is up, it's hot, the sun is down, we're wandering the desert. Okay, got it. It's called a day. Right. That's the thing. Now that word yom most times refers to a 24-hour time period. But elsewhere in Scripture, it also refers to a season. It's also used many times to refer to an era or an age of time, like the industrial age or something like that. Now, when you read the rest of this account, it sounds like a 24-hour period. Again, there's some complexities with this, so let's keep reading. The darkness, go back, please, I wasn't done. Back, please, there you go. And the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So it seems like there's evening and morning the first day. But you know what hasn't been created? Okay, how do we measure a day? How do we measure a day? Rotation of the earth, yep, on its axis. And how do we measure that? Constellations and stars, and then the sun. Sunrise, sunset. Oh, it's hot. Day, right? You know what hasn't been created yet? Sun or stars. I don't know. It's wild stuff, guys. In fact, here's the order of creation. There's light and darkness. It doesn't say stars and space. It just says light and darkness. Then it says water and sky. But you remember that the Spirit of the Lord was hovering over the waters? I don't know. Then there's land. Sun and moon don't come until day 4. Then you have birds and fish. And then day 6, land, animals, and man. This is wild stuff. And I want to remind you that when you read Genesis like a science book, you run into some problems because it's not written how is the earth made, but who made the earth. Okay? So now that the stage is set with Genesis 1 and all of these complexities or things we need to kind of hold in suspension and kind of keep in mind, we can start to answer some of the questions that science has raised of faith. Starting with the big one, the Big Bang. Okay, so the Big Bang. What about this Big Bang? It's this moment where there's nothing, and then there is the existence of time, space, and matter. And there's this explosion from a point of origin, all things. And you have atoms and dark matter, and then stars, and then planets, and then us. All of it extending from a single source, a single point of origin. That's the Big Bang. Okay? And you've heard it described, and maybe in science textbooks or something like that. But it's the idea that everything came from nothing. Now, I think it's really interesting that no other moment in history, however long ago the Big Bang was, let's say if it was billions of years or whatever it might be, that no other moments in history has everything come from nothing. And the scientists, or the atheist scientists, would say, well, what's before everything? Nothing. And is that any larger leap of faith than a creationist saying, what's before everything? God. I think both of them take a step of faith. And the more we've learned about the Big Bang, the more questions we actually have. Even though we've made discoveries, it's like every new discovery creates more questions. So the Big Bang, this theory developed kind of based on Einstein's theory of relativity and light and darkness and matter and relativity. And then a couple of mathematicians and scientists started talking about measuring things and noticing there seems to be a point of origin to the universe. And someone coined it the Big Bang, and it stuck. And then we've done subsequent research with telescopes, and we've sent up like the Hubble telescope out into space to kind of measure these things. And as we've measured these things, it's verified this hypothesis that everything started with a single point of origin, this first moment. And when like Hubble gets up in space and it starts looking at things, actually what it noticed is like, yep, everything seems to be expanding, but as you look into the edges of the universe, it's not slowing down. It's speeding up, which goes against it makes zero sense and goes against everything we know about physics, that somehow the edges of the universe are speeding up, and this creates more questions. And the more questions we have, the more it starts to bring into bring doubt into this and makes faith required on either side of the aisle on this issue. The world's leading cosmologist, okay? There's a guy, Andrew Salinger. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll get his name right. Yeah, Alan Sandage. Was the world's leading cosmologist, and he lived his life. And at the end of his life, he actually became a person of faith. And he's published papers, published books, all this kind of stuff. He studied under Edwin Hubble. He was like the undisputed heavyweight champ of the world of cosmology. And he was giving one of the last speeches he gave to a group of his peers, and here's what he said about the Big Bang. The Big Bang was a supernatural event that cannot be explained within the realm of physics as we know it. Science has taken us to the first event, but it can't take us further to the first cause. The sudden emergence of matter, space, time, and energy pointed to the need for some kind of transcendence, something supernatural. And when he said this, there was a gasp in the room because he was daring to allude towards a creator and intelligent design. And the more you learn about the Big Bang and the more we learn about science and physics, the more the question is pressed, well, what was the first cause? So that's kind of my answer of how science and the Big Bang all fit together. And I think it points to God being the creator of everything, that point of origin. And then that kind of leads to like the next big question, well, how old is the earth, right? So did this Big Bang happen, billions of years ago or millions of years ago? Or is it really like you Christians say that the earth is like 6,000, 8,000 years old? Are you serious? How is this possible? Now, I will concede that there are some things that raise all sorts of questions about the age of the earth. Like you can look at the strata on the Grand Canyon walls and be like, oh, wow, that takes millions of years. And I would agree. If everything was constant and just a slow, gradual process. But I would also ask, what happens if something cataclysmic happens? Like, I don't know, major earthquakes, worldwide flood. Wouldn't that mess with our sediment deposits in a catastrophic way? So, maybe. Then like there's other things to think about too, like the distance of stars. I agree, that's a really important question. If a star is 100 million light years away, how many years would it take? If we were traveling at the speed of light, how many years would it take for that star to reach Earth, the light from that star to reach Earth? How many years? 100 million. So is that just like a snapshot from a time that didn't exist? A photograph from a time that didn't exist? Is God playing tricks with us? Or are we actually sitting here for 100 million years and that light took its time to get to us and it got to us? Or when a star goes out and suddenly it's not there anymore. Did that not just happen? Does that light not travel? And I would agree, that's a really good question about the age of creation. However, that also assumes that light travels at a constant rate of speed through gravity fields, dark matter. What if it gets around a black hole and gets slingshotted past it? What if there's a distortion as we look through things, like when we're looking at an object underwater and we think it's one place, but you get under there and the water distorts things? What if light is distorted in that way? I don't know. And I go back to, remember, in Genesis 1 is the beginning, this beginning, and then we have the sequence of days of creation. I don't know. Or how long is a day? It's a worthy debate. I tend to lean towards young earth. But I understand that this is open for debate. And then there's other measurements of age. Like things like, okay, let's say we have a fossil and it's buried at this strata that's 3 million years ago. Well, what if the fossil somehow is suspended across multiple strata? How did it get there? Or carbon-14 dating. You absorb carbon all your life as a living organism, and then when you die, there's a decay of carbon, and we can measure that decay of carbon-14, okay? So as this decay is happening in you, and we could see it and measure how much decay has happened, and we say, this is how old you are after you die, or like when you were born and all this kind of stuff. Well, there's a problem with carbon-14 dating, is it's highly susceptible to water. So what if there is a worldwide flood? It's a very good question. How would that mess with things? Like, okay, for instance, if I had a candle that was 10 inches long, and we lit it, and that candle that was 10 inches long took 10 hours to burn, we would estimate the rate of decay on the candle was 1 inch per hour. And then if I showed you a candle that was 5 inches long, you would assume, based upon the rate of decay, that candle burned for 5 hours. But what if there were other variables involved? What if that candle was lit in a room with more of a draft and more oxygen, so it burned faster? What if that candle had a longer wick that made the flame hotter? What if somebody lit the candle, blew it out, waited a day, lit the candle, blew it out, waited a day? Or what if it was just a 6-inch candle to begin with? All of these things bring into question the rate of decay on the candle. And is it the same for carbon-14 dating? Or argon dating that we use on rocks? When Mount St. Helens erupted, they took, how many of you guys were alive when Mount St. Helens erupted? Okay, I was like just barely born, I think. What year was it? Was it 80? 80 what? 89? Then I was definitely alive. All right. I thought it was earlier than that. Someone fact-checked him real quick. What year did Mount St. Helens? And when you get it, just shout it out. Okay, so anyway, Mount St. Helens, Paul's like, you throw me under the bus here in front of everybody. Sorry, Paul. But when the ash erupted, and ash and mountain lava, they come together, they formed rocks. There were rocks formed because Mount St. Helens erupted. Then a group of scientists from Cambridge took those rocks and studied them. And in their studying, they also ran tests on the age of the rock. Laughably, these rocks that were only months old came back as millions of years old. And everybody was wondering why. And then here is what their response was. This is from the Geochron Laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Considering that the half-life of potassium 40K, is 1.25 million years, and the KAR method cannot be used to date samples that are much younger than what Christians would say is the age of the earth, or young earth Christians would say, 6,000 years old, because a few thousand years are not enough time for 40 AR to accumulate in a sample at a high enough concentration to be detected and quantified, or accurately measure argon in samples that are only a few million years old. So even our dating methods of rocks have to be held in a little bit of suspension. And this is a footnote in a textbook. And science can't even entertain another option, that maybe God made a rock, because you can't test it. And so there's no alternative theory given other than a Big Bang. And this is really simplistic and reductionistic, but I'll say it because I think it's memorable. How old was a rock when God made it? It's a great question. All right. So that's how I kind of answer the age of the earth thing. I don't know. It doesn't do much for me or against me. I just kind of, okay. Because my faith is dependent on other things. So then the next big one is evolution. That's the big one that I get all the time too, is what about evolution? How do you square your faith with the science of evolution? That is taught in our schools, not even as theory anymore. It's just taught as fact. And evolution on a very basic, idea is this idea that there's the simplest organisms from the Big Bang or whatever it might be. The simplest organisms continue to have modifications and mutations and evolve in complexity to what we are today. And that every living thing shares a common ancestry. Right? So bacteria becomes a slug, becomes a jellyfish, becomes an amphibian, becomes a reptile, becomes a mammal, becomes, the apex of creation. Chuck Norris. Mankind. Right? That we evolved in a long process. And the thing about evolution is, the more we learn about science and the more our science develops in chemistry and in DNA and in geology and paleontology, the more we develop, the more questions and concerns are raised about the theory of evolution than answers. And yet it's taught as fact because there's no other alternative theory other than a creator. And there is a lot of questions. Just on a very basic level, the missing link is still missing. You would think that if millions of us all developed from thousands of a missing link, we would have found something by now. And then you have other problems of things like the Cambrian explosion. So up to the Cambrian, go back, you're jumping ahead, go back. There you go. We have the era, based on the fossil layers or the geological layers. We have this era leading up to the Cambrian era where we have snails and bacteria, and then all of a sudden there's this explosion of all of these animals. Fish and crabs and crustaceans, all just out of nowhere. And there's no predecessor in the geological record. There's nothing that precedes them. They just appear. And scientists talk about it and they're like, yeah, it's there. We just haven't discovered it yet. But it's a big logical leap. And then there's things like fossils that we found. So for instance, the Archaeopteryx, I've had to work on saying that all week, the Archaeopteryx. It was a fossil that was found that apparently when you look at it, looks like half lizard, half bird. And when it was discovered, it was said that it brought tears to people's eyes. It brought tears to the eyes of the scientists because it proved evolution. And it brought tears to the eyes of the theists because it disproved God. Because here it is, a missing link. An example of something going from one kind of an animal to another kind of an animal. Lizard to bird. But After that discovery, we've done DNA research on it. It's a bird. It's a bird that is now extinct, and it shares no commonality with a lizard. It's a bird. And again, the more we learn about the phyla and the division of species, the more unlikely it becomes. We've never observed macroevolution. Like if you cut a road through the rainforest in the Amazon, and you could divide one species of birds, we can observe microevolution and changes, subtle changes within that species. Absolutely. We would say that's why you have a black bear, brown bear, polar bear, panda bear. But they're all bears. Same thing with these birds. You can observe microevolution, but on a macro scale, it's never, ever been found. And honest scientists concede this. Like, for instance, this guy, biologist Dr. Jonathan Wells. Go back, please. You're jumping all over. Is the key stuck? All right. For a protein molecule, go back one more if you don't mind. Back one more. There it is. As we go up the different levels in the taxonomic hierarchy, species, genus, family, order, class, common ancestry is certainly true at the species level. But we cannot say that the same at higher levels. It becomes increasingly uncertain inference. When you get to the level of phyla, the major animal groups, it's a very, very shaky hypothesis. In fact, I would say it's disconfirmed. That's a biologist who teaches biology at Berkeley, perhaps the most liberal university in our country. And he even concedes this. It's becoming unlikely, disconfirmed. But there's no alternative theory, so we continue to teach it. And then we haven't even touched on chemical evolution and how unbelievably unlikely it is. Now, this is a picture of a bacteria cell, okay? And a cell is made up of all of these different rooms and compartments like your house. And Darwin said that if you could find something that could not be reduced, that it had a complexity, an irreducible complexity to it, that you can't separate out the parts and continue to have functionality to it, then it disproves evolution. This is Darwin, what he said. But he never knew about bacteria cells to the level that we know about them today. So these bacteria cells have all these compartments. And like, for instance, it has around it, those tiny little hairs all around it. Those are called cilia, and then the tail is like a flagellum. That tail is like a motor that rotates at RPMs, runs on acid, and has a sensory navigation system. And all around that cell are there's about 200 hairs on a bacterial cell. Every one of those hairs is made up of 200 different proteins. And you can't take any of those things off of it and find a simpler use for those things. For instance, take a look at these words from a biologist named Dr. Stephen Meyer, a molecular biologist. He says, for a protein molecule to form by chance, you need the right bonds between amino acids. Then the amino acids must link up in a specified sequence. And the probability of forming a rather short functional protein, just a short functional protein, one of the proteins of the 200 in the 200 cilia around a single bacteria cell, just one of those protein sequences at random would be 1 in a 100,000 trillion. That's a 10 with 125 zeros after it. This is why you will be hard-pressed to find any chemist in the world who would dare to suggest that cells and proteins come together by chance. It boggles the mind. And then we have advances in the DNA, and we don't even have time to get into it. I'm like, we're already running out of time. In DNA, like when you take a DNA sample, you are made up of all of these codes and sequences, right? You know that you're 6 feet long of a trillion DNA letters all tightly wound together. And then when you take that, you're not just like a book. You're not just like a set of an encyclopedia. You're a library of information. My kids, we just did Ancestry.com with them so they can like learn more about their history and stuff. And all we did was spit, and we learned everything about them. It is downloaded into us as if we are programmed and we come with an owner's manual. If I gave you a disk to load into your computer and you could see the software and the loading and the ones and zeros that make it all up, wouldn't it suggest an intelligent designer behind it? And yet, there's no alternative theory to evolution. So we can't teach it. All right. Then that brings us to the question of dinosaurs. That's the other big question. What about T-Rex and the Velociraptor? I mean, there's a new Jurassic Park 12 coming out or something in the summer, right? What about these dinosaurs? And I love dinosaurs. When I was a kid, we would go to the Black Hills in South Dakota, and I loved the dinosaur museum. It was so fun, and I'd climb on the brontosaurus, and we'd see the bones. And my parents never were like, oh, we don't talk about dinosaurs in our house. And that's the devil. He put the fossils in the ground. My parents never said that. They just kind of embraced science and faith and kind of the question. And my dad, and maybe this is a simplistic explanation, but he kind of told me, he's like, well, we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. There's 7 days of creation, and then it says, now the serpent was more cunning. There's a whole lot of time that could have passed between that day of the fall and the last day of creation. How long were they in there? We don't know. We don't know. So you're sitting in the Garden of Eden. What happens with reptiles if things just keep on growing? Or they keep on getting older, they keep on growing. That's why we have giant anacondas in the Amazon and giant crocodiles in Australia. Because reptiles just have a way of keep on growing. So they're in a Garden of Eden where everything keeps on growing, there's no death, and then there's the fall. Suddenly death is introduced into the world. Maybe these massive bodies could no longer sustain these massive bodies through vegetation and predators. And maybe they just killed each other out. Maybe. We don't know. And then you get to maybe they died by natural predation. Maybe there was a comet from the sky that made a bunch of gas that killed them all. One British scientist in 2012 published a paper that was peer-reviewed that came up with a theory that maybe dinosaurs gassed themselves into extinction. You're reading that right. Maybe they tooted to death. If he could come up with a theory like that, then why can't I say, well, there was like a perfect place and then death was introduced in the world and they all just kind of died out because it was unsustainable how large they had become. And then you have a massive flood. Maybe that killed a lot of them. I don't know. Now, I do also have another theory. Brace yourself. This is a little wild. But when you have an ark, we'll talk about the ark some other time, but when you have an ark, you don't need fully grown animals on the ark. You just need babies, right? So you can have a lot of them. And you don't need all the bears. You need one bear. So you can get the panda bear, polar bear, black bear, brown bear, right? You guys got that, okay. Thank you. But 2 bears, yes, fact check, 2 bears. You need them both, guys. By the way, what year was Mount St. Helens? Anyone fact check this? 80, I knew it, man. Okay, it's 1980, sorry, Paul. So you need 2 of every kind. Maybe there were dinosaurs in the ark. And here's why I would say, just introducing a new thought for you to toy with in your brain. You can laugh at me. It's like up there with dinosaurs tooting themselves to death, okay? But have you noticed that there's not a region in the world where they don't have myths about dragons? You can go all over the world, South America, North America, Asia, Europe, doesn't matter. you will find stories of dragons. Hundreds of English townships talk about how dragons were slayed by knights of valor. When you go to China, they have all of the Chinese zodiac, right? And it's all these animals that you see, the pig, the cat, the rat. But then there's one mythological creature called the dragon? I don't know. And then you look at the artwork of dragon throughout the world, and this is all over the world. For instance, the Cambodian temple at Angkor. It's really hard to see. The people in the front, they can see it a little bit better. But you look at that thing, it looks like a stegosaurus. It's bananas. Or the Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah. That looks like a cave painting of a brontosaurus. The Mesopotamian cylinder seal, it's a seal they use to roll across parchment, right? That looks like two animals twisting necks, but we have the same picture of two dinosaurs or dragons twisting their necks together in China and in South America. It's almost like they observed this behavior like giraffes will do, where they twist their necks together. And that maybe they were drawn this way with such commonality all across the world because, I don't know, they saw them. It's a wild theory. And then you have writings like in the book of Job. We just heard in the book of Job where to start a message where he was like, consider the horse, Job. Consider the lion, Job. Consider the raven, Job. And then he says, look at the behemoth. The what? Yeah, the behemoth. I don't know what that is. Well, there it is. And he tells him to look at it. Not read the stories about it and the myths and the tales of it. No, look at the behemoth, which I made along with you and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. Okay, up to that point you could have said that was an elephant, but can you think of any animal with a tail like a cedar? The sinews of its thighs are close-knit, its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. It ranks first among the works of God. Not to mention the Bible has words, elephant, and Hebrew has words for alligators. And what is he talking about? Y'all, I don't know. I just think it opens up the possibility that science could inform your faith and faith could inform your science. Now, I just blasted through some of the really common questions. I know you guys have questions. We've run out of time. Okay? We have run out of time for you guys to be able to give me questions. So we're going to put the number on the screen just because whatever, you can text them and maybe we'll get to them. I'm sure you guys have questions for me. But listen, okay, I have questions for science. And I'm going to wrap up here and then we'll get out of here, I promise. I have done more research for this sermon than any sermon I've ever done in my entire life. This week I read chemistry, biology, anthropology, geology, genetics. I have read so much stuff this week because I don't feel like I can not give this to you as a full course meal. I don't feel like I can condense this any further, but to do so would be an injustice. And I hope this has been beneficial and helpful to you and hasn't felt like a classroom TED Talk setting kind of thing. I hope this is edifying to you. Now, but I have questions for faith, okay? Or I have questions for science. One of them, morality. What about morality? You asked me questions about my faith. I want to ask you, science, questions about your faith. What about morality? If everything came from nothing, if we've come from nothing, then in the words of Queen, nothing really matters. Nothing. We come from nothing, then nothing matters. And any honest atheist will tell you as much. That you can't object to me stealing. You can't object to me killing. You can't object to genocide. Because nothing matters. There can't be morality. Or if you're just a collection of chemicals, how can you trust your reason? You're just a byproduct of an explosion. Where does beauty come from? Why do you tear up at the Mona Lisa or a sunset or Mozart? Where does that come from? Is that just a chemical reaction, or is there actual beauty in the world that because there's an intelligent designer, a creator who called it good? What about love? Maybe love that you experience is just a collection of chemicals that you experience for your spouse. It's just a collection of chemicals. Love isn't real. If we came from nothing, Chemically, love is no different than eating a bunch of chocolate. If we came from nothing, then none of these things are defensible. Morality, beauty, love. So what do you do with that? When you feel deep down inside you love your spouse, you feel deep down inside that child labor is wrong. Doesn't that point to a creator? Another one, fine-tuning. What about fine-tuning? I don't have time to get into this, but basically you've heard all the complexities of everything. If you walked up to a river and you saw these rocks stacked on top of each other, if you saw these rocks stacked up on top of each other, delicately balanced, you wouldn't assume a tornado came through and put them all on top of each other. You would assume there was an intelligent designer behind it all, delicately balancing these things with incredible precision. And you've heard me talk about all of life, but like the ability of our electromagnetic field around our earth, the angle at which we tell the distance from the sun, all of these things point to intelligent design. So how can it, if I flip a quarter 5 heads in a row, you'd be like, wow, that's really unlikely. If I do it 100 times, if I did it 1,000 times, at some point you would say the quarter has been rigged. There's been an intelligent designer behind it all making it happen. And that's my question for science. What do you do with all the fine-tuning? All of it. From the DNA to the gases that are up in the atmosphere. It's perfectly balanced. Now, I'll just end with this quote, and I'm sorry I have to cut this sermon short. A Harvard professor, scientist at Harvard, Dr. Gingrich, he wrote these words and he was roasted for saying them, but I have a hunch that as science continues to find more questions than answers, we will see more and more scientists concede creation as a viable theory. That's my hunch. Here's what he wrote. I believe the book of nature with its astounding details, the blade of grass, the conus kundaluni, or the resonance levels of the carbon atom, that they suggest a God of purpose, a God of design. And I think my belief makes me no less a scientist. And I hope today that you can walk out of here holding both faith and science together, and that it leads you to reason for God.